Welcome to today's IMServe webinar called Energy Legislation in Buildings, the Value of Submetering. Today we have with us Peter Leggett, an energy manager with over 20 years of industry experience, best practice and knowledge on legislation. Peter will be taking you through the minimum efficiency standard and what that means for landlords. And then this will be followed by Carl Rossi, who specialises in implementation and understanding of customers' metering and submetering requirements. Over the next 45 minutes, we will cover what you need to know about the new legislation and how best to understand what this means to you and what options are available to you to support both compliance with legislation and saving energy. So before we begin, a few housekeeping requirements. If I could please kindly ask you all to put your phones on mute. This will prevent any feedback on sound. If you wish to communicate with us during the webinar, please use the chat box. And for any questions you'd like us to respond to, please use the Q&A box and we will address any questions at the end of this presentation. But don't worry, if you think of any questions afterwards, feel free to email us at marketing@imserve.com and we can respond after today's presentation. We will also be publishing the webinar as a podcast on the IMServe website. Now over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Helen. I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes to cover the theme of energy legislation and buildings. I will touch on past and current energy-related legislation within the context of property management and give consideration to where value may be added from the use of submetering and data to meet various compliance scenarios. I then want to make you aware of some new legislation, that's the minimum energy efficiency standards. With the range of interested parties with us today, I hope to introduce concepts or perhaps reinforce existing knowledge around legislation affecting energy in buildings and how this may impact your own business activity. Hopefully from today you can take away information that may assist current management practice or perhaps flag elements for you to consider when looking to comply or generally improve your premises. Okay, let's begin. As a start, it's worth considering who has the responsibility for managing either property, energy or both. Remember that a lot of legislation impacts apply to both public and private sectors. I have outlined what I see as 5 key groups, behind which will sit tenants or budget holders. The lowest relationship being a single landlord, single site, where perhaps the landlord is responsible for everything from cleaning windows, perhaps a concierge service, buying the energy, paying the bills, and maintaining heating and cooling and other equipment for the tenant. We also see estate managers, where they may be in charge of a single site or multi-site complex buildings. This could be a single office block or adjacent blocks with a number of tenants, and perhaps different equipment and systems within each location, creating different management strategies. From the late 1980s, energy prices were relatively low, and there was a decline in the role of the energy manager across the UK. Many organisations then placed energy alongside the facilities manager role, so energy and the maintenance of equipment was treated alongside the buying of general goods and services. Chances are that in such situations, energy efficiency issues were overlooked, with delivery or service rather than cost being the key element. In more recent years, the growth of a green agenda has created a concept of sustainability, both for businesses, energy and of buildings. One impact of related legislation has been for organisations to place energy within a compliance role. Much legislation creates a defined role, often termed as an authorised or responsible person. These nominated staff have to sign off submissions or reports to a registration process. Therefore, there's some legal risk, and consequently compliance may be seen as an executive responsibility. The last of the 5 key management groups, as I see it, are portfolio managers. Think about retail organisations with shops in many towns, perhaps universities with a split campus and multiple individual buildings, or office estates across different cities and so on. Very often the role encompasses the building fabric, maintenance of plant and equipment. Such managers consult with experts on opportunity or performance matters and perhaps buy all the energy centrally before passing costs through to tenants. In simple terms, there is no one job description for who looks after energy or the legislation in buildings. There are a number of energy-based legislation packages that are active now and warrant action or consideration as you manage your buildings or estates. So I want to take a few minutes to recap. remembering that much legislation has a direct or indirect effect on tenants. I've started with Part L of the Buildings Regulations, as this has been long around, having an impact on design and refurbishment of buildings. This is updated about every 4 to 5 years with changing standards on materials, design and methods. Part L has long included commentary on the use of metering and submetering, with the use of data to help manage buildings and to improve the quality of analysis. So if you're in the process of a refurb or a building extensions or new premises, these regulations aim to make the property as energy efficient as practical. We can't talk about legislation without reference to the EU. The Energy Performance of Buildings Directive goes back to 2002 and made its first real impact in the UK for the Domestic Home Information Pact in 2003-04. Into these, the energy performance of the home was recorded for any prospective purchaser. Whilst ridiculed a bit in the house purchaser because they're likely to be swayed by available schools or postcodes, the similar process evolved in non-domestic buildings in the form of DECs and EPCs. The display energy certificates are for the public sector with the annual renewal, and they have an associated advisory report that has to be restated every 7 years. So if you're familiar with these, you can go to your local library, swimming pool, town hall or school, and the advisory report that's associated will set out areas for reducing or saving energy. Energy performance certificates exist where premises are for sale or to be let to a new tenant, where premises are larger than 500 metres squared, and for new build. These come with a recommendation report, and that's currently valid for 10 years. So currently, any estate agent involved in the sale or rental process must ensure that the EPC exists before advertising. The methodology for DECs and EPCs requires energy data. Then it looks at the building structure and design to determine its overall performance. Obviously, depending on the complexity of a site, submetering data may be suggested to help the ongoing review of plant and equipment. The UK also recognises the general principles that greenhouse gases lead to climate change, recognising that if the UK PLC can reduce its use of fossil fuels and emissions, we can play a positive level and lead in global impacts. There is a secondary advantage, and that a drive for efficiency can make UK organisations more competitive. It shouldn't be overlooked. The Climate Change Act comes to the fore through the carbon reduction commitment. In this, organisations will pay for their emission impacts. We're now into phase 2, and there are around about 2,200 participating organisations. These are large energy users in the public and private sector. The current costs are around about £16.40 per tonne CO2. That's an additional £16.40 for blocks of energy that's already been paid for on the supply bill. So as a crude guide, every energy block, electricity 1,800 kilowatts, gas about 5,500 kilowatts, adds £16.40. If you look at a monthly electricity bill, and if you're paying around about £6,000 per month, that equates basically to around about an extra £16.40 for every single day that you're using energy. For this particular piece of legislation, the prime data source is metered electricity and gas. Gas data may also be supported through paper bill records. To reinforce these principles and to raise awareness, there have also been changes under the Companies Act. This is more recent. This means that any registered business has to look at communicating their emission impact to stakeholders and shareholder groups. It forms part of the annual report on accounts. There are 6 key greenhouse gases, which include CO2, methane, sulphur, and so on. Significant portions of that emissions are going to be related to energy use, such as the electricity, gas, oil, LPG. All of these things can be metered to get the core consumption data before you convert to the tonne CO2 and so on. Other emissions arise from processes such as air conditioning or transport. Submeters or loggers may help some of that data management, not all. Data is then converted to CO2 for the annual accounts using metrics like tonne CO2 over sales or by product or by employees and so on. I'll look at more current legislation shortly, but just want to go back a bit and look at metering briefly and its value. There are 3 core elements to this. Hopefully this will link to the efforts you will really undertake to manage your buildings and running costs, and how data is necessary to support the legislative and other performance activity. And from this, perhaps you can visualise the benefits that meters and data can bring. The principle remains that you cannot manage without measurement. Simply, meters measure. Metering devices can be used for a raft of utility or process data to create management information. As buildings and compliance managers, or even as tenants, you need information to make decisions, report to your stakeholders, calculate costs, or simply to measure and to report to comply. Data can be used to pass through costs to designated areas, such as for tenant billing. Today, most metering systems can be linked direct to a web-based analysis tool. Our own system holds around about 250,000 separate metering devices at the moment, with multiple data streams coming from some of those. So information such as electricity, gas, water, temperature, power factor, volts and amps are all available from metered devices. Last year alone, we created nearly 1 million management reports. Some of those reports were a single data item, some of them were across hundreds of meters in a single output. So meters and data help build this view of your portfolio. Submetering plant and equipment can help performance monitoring or even form part of a maintenance plan, such as energy used in circulation pumps, air conditioning fans and motors and so on. Fiscal metering, very simply, think of the bill, and also as a prime source for the legislation such as CRC and the greenhouse gas reporting. Take the raw numbers, easy to convert. These types of meters generally have memory capability, mostly in the region of 30 to 100 days. Likelihood is they're going to record interval or register read information and measure items such as standard electricity kilowatt hour and reactive energy values. Submetering, think of risers to individual tenants or specific areas within complex portfolios, such as a campus-style arrangement, like universities or department blocks. Very often a fiscal standard meter is used with some memory capability, probably about 5 to 30 days. Submeters are useful in the context of the Part L logbook that I mentioned earlier to show the overall opportunity for measurement. For instance, Part L asks that 90% of the total energy of a building be separately metered to help the benchmarking within that building, and data then can be used in tenant reports and so on. If we look at loggers, they're simply a type of metering device, often capturing just the instant value. These are simply meters without memory. Multiple data streams could be connected to such a device for tenants or performance measurement. Some loggers may be temporary fixtures that you can move around your estate for specific projects. There's also data streams that come via BMS systems. It's useful for building management systems to record utility data, while they may also be controlling plant. So, for example, a BMS may be linked to several recording levels of energy on a number of devices, whilst at the same time switching that equipment on or off based on some local rules, which could be temperature, time, or even set point. In the context of buildings, BMS are often seen as a performance enhancement within Part L, or advocated already in the DEC advisory report or the EPC recommendations. BMS obviously automate plant and equipment and may otherwise have exceeded or become inefficient based on manual local control. I think the key message is on this bit: meters equals data, data is information, and the management of buildings and legislation needs that data. So we all know that meters and data are valuable, so let's go back and look at the new legislation impacts. Legislation is obviously a constant moving feast of opportunity for all, with impacts on landlords and tenants alike. Very often these things pass us by until we need to comply, so here are some things that may need your attention. The Energy Act 2011 is setting out the minimum energy efficiency standards, which will probably lead to significant action by landlords to improve building stock. It's coming in two waves, in 2018 and 2023. And will define that any let premises have a minimum of E rating, without which it could be illegal to let. The emphasis of the minimum energy efficiency standards is to agitate landlords to improve buildings, through which they may be rewarded by a higher rent. The tenant will be benefiting from more efficient locations. I'll talk more about this shortly, so it probably warrants a bit more focus. We've got the UK interpretation of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. This has arrived predominantly through the Energy Savings Opportunity Scheme, which is effectively live and hitting us now. The principal drive here is that we want energy sustainability and reduction in fossil fuel consumption across all member states. The UK interpretation is that larger organisations should audit their energy consumptions to identify and submit reports on where waste may occur and to agitate as many improvements as possible. The UK will have between 15 and 20,000 participating organisations, and if you're going to be a participant, you'll have, very simply, more than 250 employees or a turnover of more than 50 million euros. Once you're in this scheme, you can create a benchmark year for all energy consumption. And like I said, ESOS is effectively active now. Your benchmark year has got to cut across 2014, 2015. You then need to identify significant energy, that's 90% of the total, and then you audit the energy aspects of the portfolio, like your buildings, your processes or your transport, to find the saving opportunities. ESOS talks about savings that are cost effective, with calculations being preferred based on life cycle cost analysis rather than simple paybacks like 24 months. Your own boardroom will become legally responsible for the submission of the reports, and penalties do exist. This ESOS process will then repeat every 4 years. Think about this sensibly. Organisations should expect to exist 10 to 15 years from now. And if that's true, the question has to be asked, why wouldn't an organisation want to save from opportunities they identify? So this legislation puts pressure on boardrooms to take that responsibility and look ahead rather than the short term, trying to break the complacency that often sits behind statements like, if I can't save it in 24 months, I won't do it. How will it look to shareholders if in 4 years' time, the same submission for ESOS lists the very same opportunities that you record this year and nothing's been done? So if organisations choose not to reduce or save, then it is value taken out of their business. Another tack that's been introduced at the moment is to encourage the public sector, and there's a review that's currently ongoing of the display energy certificates. The issues here are the way in which the UK implemented the scheme compared to other EU member states. Now, some of you may or may not be aware that a lot of DECs are either out of date or haven't been renewed on the annual basis like they're supposed to be. So this piece of activity that's going on at the moment is to re-look at how the public sector uses DECs, how they should be renewed, should the advisory reports have a longer life cycle, and so on. There are particular areas of waste in the public sector. There's talk of the NHS alone using about £750 million a year on energy. And if you look at some of the DEC certificates that exist, you have to wonder how much effort is being put into the renewal process and the analysis of potential saving opportunity. Basically, government wants to push money onto the improvement and not into the compliance. So whilst there's a lot of activity already underway, I wanted to look at the minimum energy efficiency standards in a little bit more detail, as this represents a significant step for landlords and perhaps for tenants about how UK building stock is going to be improved. If we look back at some of that earlier legislation, we can see that data is used to convert to emissions or to create benchmarks or to report and to help end-of-year submission. Data can help identify savings or opportunities, but overall, that earlier legislation had little consequence of inaction. So my interpretation is that the MEES will drive action as the standard sets specific performance. This should create much better results than seen through CRC, ESOS, greenhouse gas reporting. And here, with the minimum energy efficiency standards, metering will play a part in the audit and the management process, especially where legislation actively repeats on its 4-year cycle. The core legislation indicates that it will effectively become illegal to let buildings or premises to new tenants from 2018 if that premise does not meet an E energy rating. That rating is going to be based on known and used EPC methodology, which has already been established for new build for a number of years and new tenant arrangements. The EPC method itself already uses energy data, predominantly for meters, and in its process helps define good or poor results. The big change is the defined energy rating. So if the E rating is not met, penalties will be applied. And as mentioned before, previous or current legislation has little consequence in this area. So MES has some teeth and some purpose. To give a flavour of where I see activity being developed, Department of Energy and Climate Change recently published some statistics for the period of September to December 2014. In that quarter, there were some 18,000 EPCs lodged. 35% of those were generated for premises that were rated E or below. So if we just take that piece of evidence, I estimate around about 25,000 of the current EPCs per year could need action to raise the existing energy performance to avoid being non-compliant for either the current or any new tenant. So improvement could be insulation, relamping, metering specific load for maintenance, or even replacement of central plant. For those tenants who will be subject to tenancy renewal in the next few years, these same standards will start applying from 2023, when the tenancy at renewal must be matching to the E rating or better. So if you're a landlord or a building manager and you've got some tenants that are in the premises at the moment and have got a longer lease, it means you've got some time to plan or engage. And there'll be a need for landlords, building managers and tenants to look at the overall consumption and the improvements that can be made. There are very few exemptions in this legislation because the government is really pushing for action rather than inaction. One exemption could be if the improvement payback period exceeds 7 years. So again, here there's a push for sensible life cycle analysis rather than short-termism. And we can see this is very simple from an 18 to 24-month payback rule. So specifically, the minimum energy efficiency standard is going to endorse long-term benefits and long-term opportunities. So as with ESOS, look at the life cycle rather than any short-term tweaks. Overall, I think both landlords, building managers, property managers, tenants should all see this as a positive. It may remove some energy poor property from the market, as refurbishments could in some cases become more costly than perhaps a rebuild. Standards of energy efficiency generally will start to rise. That's then going to reduce costs to tenants and landlords alike. Emission costs are also going to fall. For the landlord, if a property becomes more efficient and it offers a better working environment, chances are a higher rent may be acquired. Certainly, I think we can expect that green-aware businesses are more likely to award themselves green-aware premises. There are significant penalties for non-compliance, and it's worth touching on some of this. If you choose to do nothing as a landlord or building manager and plan to do nothing when you come to let from 2018 or renew in 2023, you could find yourself non-compliant. Failure to provide accurate information or continue to let non-compliant estate will result in fixed fines based on up to 10 to 20% of the rateable value. Some of these fines could reach £150,000 after 3 months. This isn't inconsequential, and it becomes very significant if you have to repeat this across multiple lets. So if, for instance, you are a landlord or property manager, start looking at the risk management in your business and the risk of inaction against the investment opportunity. This could ramp up quite significantly. For example, if you're a landlord of a multi-tenanted office block, you could end up with having 5 or 6 different EPCs for different tenants, all of which could be at risk of non-compliance. So, as just mentioned, the minimum energy efficiency requirements need you to start thinking about the buildings you own, manage, or where you may be a tenant. So here are a couple of the scenarios that you may recognise in your own estate. Fundamentally, the EPC methodology looks at energy data through metering of equipment or a plant, and it plays an increasingly important role in assessing the performance rating when it's linked to floor area, types of design, and the fabric of a building. Data then adds value to audit, it adds value to benchmark and to monitor. All of those things become important, and especially if you're going to look at the life cycle management and assessment of a building that you're managing. The EPC also includes this recommendation report for further improvements. So it could be that you find a short-term win to get an E rating by, say, 2023, but I would suggest that you don't be surprised if the government comes out and says that by 2030, that rating's got to be D or better. So look ahead rather than just the short term. It's very likely that premises you own or let have mixed energy requirements. Some are likely to have a centralised heating, possibly separate power and light to each tenant. There may also be some centralised services where apportionment or separation of load by floor warrants consideration. In these sorts of scenarios, submeters may save some time and effort by gathering consumption information remotely and giving web access to the numbers which you can convert or report against, tenant by tenant, area by area. If yours is a complex estate, accuracy and the ease of access to data over estimation may be invaluable. Remember, the drive is to have an energy efficient estate, and the repeating nature of compliance means automation of data gathering will add value over any manual processes. So, hopefully to summarise, I hope this overview has been informative. Perhaps reinforces your own expectations of how legislation is a significant driving factor in the energy performance of your buildings. And the energy bias legislation is there to drive energy emission reductions, which offer opportunities. Energy emissions fundamentally cost money, so legislation is increasingly expecting action rather than just reporting. I've talked across a number of these pressure points that already exist to drive you, landlords and tenants towards greater energy efficiency. Remember, a lot of the current UK building stock is old or has old equipment, making it energy poor. The numbers show that around a third of commercial buildings may be rated E or below, meaning business and tenants are paying more for utilities than necessary. Tenants prefer to pay actual rather than estimated costs. They want efficient rather than inefficient premises. Many seek to show green credentials, and these are important tenant considerations. So metering and submetering can help with improving access to key information for all parties. Data itself allows landlords the ability to benchmark historic values for audit and to enhance existing processes. There's legislation such as CRC or mandatory greenhouse gas reporting that probably warrants using existing metering systems to create simple conversions. All I'd say is use the data to investigate or improve your management. Fundamentally, I'd say, why put off savings till tomorrow when you can bank those reductions today? ESOS is already here, the clock's ticking in 2015, minimum energy efficiency standards are coming. So, just a warning, prepare your business to manage those risks. Many thanks for your attention for what can sometimes be a bit of a dry subject. I'm now going to pass you over to Carl so you can talk a little bit more about metering and submetering in a bit more detail.
Thanks very much, Pete. So as Pete said, I'm going to talk about submetering and metering a little bit more in depth from Pete's presentation. So how can IMServe help? Well, I've chosen three of our core services. We actually do a lot of physical metering, submetering, and our main services, data visibility for this data. So physical metering then, we actually provide installs and data collection for half-hourly and non-half-hourly meters, and then we actually provide that data to the supplier and to our customers. We also provide gas and water logger installations, the only difference being we don't actually supply the data to the supplier, it's only for the customer data only. So with submetering then, we actually submeter electric, gas and water, and with the electric we can actually submeter any circuit of the customer's choice. We've even started to look at steam submetering. Data visibility, so that is our EDV platform, which is Energy Data Vision, EDV 2.0. Okay, so why use submetering? So basically, submetering is used for billing, recharging of tenants, performance tracking, facilities management and fault detection. So what do we want to measure? So I've just put a few examples here of what customers typically want to measure. So it's not really an exhaustive list, but it just gives you a flavour. The submetering is not limited. So if there's a circuit there, then it can be measured. Looking at this illustration on the left and on the right-hand side, this gives you three ways to obtain data. So working from the bottom there, the first one is actually looking at specific equipment on hours run, and then looking at the data sheet to work out the consumption. So the issue with this is not actually that reliable, but the device could actually be on for longer than you anticipated. So this is really just an estimation, though it's a cheap way of gaining some data. The second one is by way of difference. So this assumes a meter is already in place and that someone will read the meter at a point in time and then read it again to gain an understanding of the consumption used. So the issue here is A meter would need to be installed, and B, a man would need to go and read this. Also, it'll only show you a total consumption rather than profile data. Okay, now the one at the top there, the third one, is direct metering. So this is remote data collection. So the benefits to this option are that you don't need anyone to make the calculations to understand the consumption. Neither do you need a man to locate the meter and provide a reading. So what you get is profile data in half-hourly intervals. This is a more expensive option to install, but if you offset against manual time spent either making calculations or meter reading, then you can start to see the benefits of this data. Of all the options, this is by far the most accurate and is better in operation as it's automatic, whereas the others have room for error, for example, incorrect calculations or the wrong read taken. Okay, so what do you do once the metering is installed? So installing a meter will not save energy on its own. We've got this cycle where the first is monitoring. So reporting on the consumption daily, weekly or monthly to understand the consumption levels, looking for anomalies. That's a monitoring stage, but obviously we need to react to the information in order to gain some savings or cut out energy wastage. So the reaction stage is after receiving this information that can provide you with quantifiable savings. You can simply have a meter and the report with lots of information, then all it is information. So it's really how we react as the real value. The next stage is investigation. So for example, if you've got an office that runs for a 10-hour window per day and the metering profile data on the circuit shows that the lights are on overnight, then an action or procedure can be put in place to make sure the lights are switched off. EDV has overnight alerts that can help identify this issue at day +1, so you can actually reduce the wastage on site, so it doesn't actually go unnoticed for a number of days or months. Next is to rectify. So for the example that I talked about, changing the procedure to help with the human behaviour, or you could decide to install PIR sensors or link this to the VMS system to make sure that you cut out that wastage. And then the cycle goes back into the monitoring stage, so you can see the effects of your actions, making adjustments to hours and so on. Okay, just a snippet from the UK Buildings Regulations Part L. So I took the provision of submetering. So there's a few examples of what Part L suggests that you submeter. So just to give you a bit of an idea. So looking at example refurbishments with submetering then. So lighting changes. For instance, again going back to Part L, the sum of all general light fittings in an office, industrial storage areas need to average 55 linear lumens per circuit watt, which sounds quite complex, so a simplified version would be to just look at kilowatts per metre squared. Okay, so the HVAC retrofit. So if a building is to have a HVAC upgrade, it's achievable to submeter the load for the current HVAC system to get a baseline, then once the new kit is installed, monitor the effects, and then this can actually be reported on. So if the building owner changes any equipment, then data is key to understand the before and after consumption pattern, or for benchmarking equipment against performance across the portfolio. But it is achievable to monitor specific equipment or on a per-floor basis. This enables clients to understand the best practice for further projects on other floors or buildings. So I'm just going to touch on CIVC TM39. This is a document that promotes best practice in the design of energy metering and submetering in non-domestic buildings. It helps facilities managers to introduce metering and submetering in those existing buildings So this gives you some really good methodology. I recommend the read if you're an owner occupier of a building, if you're a landlord, managing agent, tenant, risk manager. It's just a really, really good read to get a good understanding of how to implement some submetering strategy. Okay, so physical data alone would require estimations to split into individual tenant bills. So this is because the prime supply is recording consumption across all energy aspects in the location. So in this case, then estimating tenants' energy consumption per square foot, for instance, is a way, but some would argue that tenants use energy in different ways. For example, one tenant could use a large server room, or another tenant could be on the cold side of the building requiring more heating, and so on. If estimation is used, then it could be easily opened up to tenant disputes, so therefore submetering is a far better option. Our standard submetering offering is to install MID-approved meters, so these are billable grade meters. Given our position in the meter operator in the UK electricity industry, submetering then enables a range of tenant reporting capabilities. So types of sites include single buildings with multi-tenants, or a collection of buildings with either multi-tenants or departments with different cost centres. And also campus arrangements, for instance, universities is a good example. Each having the common goal to gain data for assigning the cost of consumption to a cost centre or to each tenant. Okay, so I'm going to go through a few submetering scenarios that we come across, and actually some of the bespoke solutions that we provide. So scenario 1, the single submeter solution. So this is fairly standard. 1 meter there with a single comms, very much like the physical meter setups. You can monitor any circuit or distribution board, whatever customer really wishes to choose. Some recent customers have monitored a boathouse within a harbour complex, lighting within a building, or even a coffee shop within the building on the bottom floor. So scenario 2, where can data loggers be used? So really, data loggers reduce the communications charges if you've got multiple meters. So what we can do is link the meters to a single data logger, and then that will transmit all the data into the IMServe servers. So in a recent project where we installed submetering, in a large office block, we had 17 floors, which over 30 meters were installed. We reduced the ongoing charges to a single fee, which dramatically reduced the project costs. So in scenario 3, to be honest, usually we like to hardwire the meters to a communication device, but there are some instances where this is not possible. So for instance, if there's low GSM signal in a particular area of the site, we use a radio frequency. Also, if there's a site with many different buildings and they want a cost-efficient solution for data collection, is another example. And another reason could be that the sheer distance between the buildings or the site, the cabling would just be too expensive, so we would then again use radio frequency. So like in scenario 2, we'd link all the meters together to a centralised point and send that back up to the IMServe servers. So the benefit of this is significant savings on comms charges as we'd link them together, and also savings on cabling. Okay, so just looking at building management with the plant and process performance. So our meters hold various types of data such as volts, amps, power factor, etc. So from receiving this data, energy bureaus or facilities teams can react to this data looking for anomalies and rectifying issues promptly. Metering is key in energy performance contracts as quantification is required, especially if shared savings occur. Again, so for example, Prestige office building in West London, we have metering across a variety of floors and distribution panels. So the metering is actually circa 520 channels of data across different floors, phases, and down to volt amps, power factor, and power energy, providing unique and detailed insight for the building management team across the energy systems and different tenants. The client actually uses EDV to access the results to plan, react, and to maintain energy within the building. Tenant billing reports use the energy metering to apportion the costs. Okay, so I'm just going to talk a bit more about specific equipment now. So here I'm thinking chillers, AHUs, process or production lines, where you can use this data typically to get an understanding of performance tracking, faults with the systems, so fan speeds, temperature change and so on, the apportionment of costs of this plant to tenants, maintaining efficiency of the current process and gaining a better understanding of which parts of the process can become inefficient. You can pilot energy efficiency reduction measures. The metering will help quantify whether a project has been successful, and then potentially the savings measure can be rolled out to the rest of the portfolio. Okay, so this is just a quick view of some of our nice and tidy installations, but within these installations we do come up with some challenges. So, for instance, room for CTs is sometimes an issue, so we'd like to usually survey the site first. We do work under asbestos, gaining an understanding of old distribution drawings to make sure that the labelling corresponds to what the load is actually used for. Connecting and positioning of dim rails and enclosures, again looking at space issues there. The linkage between floors, so cable routing. We do liaise with the customers to sort of prepare shutdowns, and we do tend to work out of hours. Okay, so our visualization tool, Energy Data Vision. So it's a tool, as Pete suggested earlier, we actually take in all utilities, so electricity, gas, water, and we are doing steam as well now. So I've got a few reports there just to give you a bit of a flavour. Just starting with a nice and tidy, simple report, the reading extract report. So it's a basic Excel CSV report which you can then make calculations, you can alter. It's an Excel report, so you can do your own thing. Then we've got the monthly analysis graph. So this shows consumption per day, and it can be colour-coded to show different activities such as trading hours, non-trading, weekend, etc. This helps to make the data really stand out for specific periods to really identify waste. And then we've got the day split report. So this shows a week's worth of data, and again can be colour-coded based on specific timings of activities. Note with this report there's actually a data table below to give you the consumption per interval. So EDV has lots of other functionalities such as grouping, annual and monthly views, and then we can convert it to financial reports. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about EDV and looking at tenant billing reports. Obviously we're talking about submetering, so we'll have a little look at these reports. So tenant bill reports is actually, it's automatically run, and it runs in the form of two parts. So the first is an overall consumption billing report for the landlord, which gives you a breakdown of each individual tenant, and then the second is a report for each tenant in an invoice style. EDV has the flexibility to add day, night, weekend rates, as well as VAT and standing charge rates. So just looking at the picture on the left, EDV can even apportion the remaining consumption of landlord areas to the rest of the tenants in a percentage of the building. So for instance, if customer A has 50% of the floors, then they could have 50% of the remaining consumption for the common parts. Okay, so just to summarise then, so metering has different uses that ARMServe can provide, so physical metering, submetering and logging of, say, gas and water. Consider guidance on what you need to monitor, so please look at TM39, that's the CIBSE document, and also Part L. The cycle of information from data, so where I talked about the monitor, react, investigate, rectify, just keep going through the motions. Then link metering to a central cross-utility platform. So for instance, putting all your meters from your portfolios into one central point is really key to gain a great understanding. And I just want to leave you with this one-liner. The philosophy is really, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Thank you very much. I think we'll some time for
Okay.
some questions.
Yeah, okay, thanks Carl and Peter. I hope you all found that to be very informative and beneficial. If you do have any questions for either Carl or Peter, then please do continue to email them across. But in the meantime, thank you to those who've already sent questions over. We'll now go through and answer some of them. So, okay, Peter, I think this one's probably for yourself. Can I get an EPC for each of my 4 office blocks and about 25 separate organisations?
A lot will depend on lease terms. So if I assume that all 25 organisations have different net services and significant floor area, then probably 4 EPCs won't be enough. So in that scenario, you probably need to consider how each let relates to central or specific energy services, such as shared or defined, plant, heating, lighting, cooling. Under the minimum energy efficiency standards, you'll need to consider whether any existing EPC is above or below the E rating. So that's going to help you find if you've got to target improvements for specific areas. So you could imagine perhaps, I don't know, the top floor has lots of glass and lots of heat losses and is F-rated, but the ground floor could be insulated and D-rated. On top of that, there's the added question of, I guess, the let periods. It isn't clear from the question if some areas are short-term let with new tenants who would need to be resolved under the legislation for 2018, or whether they're longer-term lets which are probably going to be treated under the renewal of their let in 2023. Basically, the effort to meet E or to sustain an E, each tenancy renewal needs to be considered in the plans for the building. So can you get an EPC for each of the buildings? Possibly, but I think you need to look in more detail at the type of tenancy arrangements and the arrangements around the dates and how many EPCs you currently run.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Kyle, I have a multi-tenancy complex. How would I go about getting submetering installed? Can you explain the process, please?
Yeah, sure. So submetering really is bespoke to the building, so we'd ideally like to survey the site to alleviate any assumptions that we've got, and then provide some recommendations along with a proposal. We provide solutions to match the customer's requirements as well as the customer's budget. So there may be times when the customer needs to reduce the scope due to the customer's budget, or the other way around, when we need to increase the scope to match the customer's end goal.
Okay, so probably very much linked to that is this question then. How much roughly would a submeter cost to install?
Okay, probably just give you an average cost between 500 and 750, but this is really dependent on the current situation at site. Obviously, we're not sure if there's any metering infrastructure there at the moment, so preferably we'd need to do a survey first, so we don't really shock the customer down the line with any sort of further costs. Okay,
thank you. Peter, I've been asked to sort out the legislation issues in our estate as the previous manager has retired. Still a bit confused, but can I use my meter data for both ESOS and CRC, or do I need submetering?
The CRC legislation is predominantly around the prime source being the fiscal bill consumption. So for electricity, for most of those who are in CRC, those people have half-hourly meters and are converting probably smaller sites to half-hourly already. That's obviously saving a lot of manual effort, I think, as Carl alluded to earlier, compared to perhaps manual reads which might have gone on in the past. For gas, the prime source is a mixture of the two. Either you've installed automatic metering, submetering for your main gas supply, or you're still reliant on the bills. So I'd say meter anything you possibly can, because overall, there's a long-term benefit in getting hold of the data and cutting out manual effort.
Yeah, and the more transparency, the better. Yeah. Okay. How much will MEEs cost?
Short answer is I don't know. Don't know what the market rate will be for the MES and the EPCs that come onto that. As with current EPCs, prices normally depend upon how complex a site is and the density of an estate. So I've seen EPCs in the market being allocated perhaps 2 hours to 2 days to complete. When EPCs and DECs were first introduced, the market anticipated there was a quality and there's going to be fees of sort of £300 to £500 per certificate based on knowledge and the quality of the person that was going to do the audit. Now you can see some EPCs advertising just sort of £70. I think what we can say is that the EPC process, which will form part of the MEES, has been around for about 8 years or so, so it's a fairly mature market. However, as many of the premises are below the E rating, I think there could be increase in demand as we get to 2018 and then as 2023. So you might be wanting to sit down with the assessor that did the work on the last visit to better understand the improvements you might need to take. I think for the renewal process, it's basically a matter of then converting any previous recommendation into action.
Okay, thank you. I have electric submetering already installed, but how do I go about installing gas or water submetering? Kyle, do you want to take that?
Yeah, okay. So depending on the current submetering system at site, obviously if this is just dumb submetering or if this is actually going remotely collected, or we would need to understand that. IMServe could potentially sort of connect a logger to all these submeters at site and then install the water and gas and link that to the logger as well. So again, you'll be saving on costs for data collection charges. So that's what we'd like to do. But the other part of the question really is we do install gas and water submeters. The process is really we try and gain as much information from a site survey and then give you a firm cost proposal to do the installation.
Okay, thank you. I think that's about all we have time for now, so thank you both very much, and thank you for all of you who've participated in this afternoon's webinar and listened in. If you do have any further questions or want more information, please email us at marketing@imserve.com, and don't forget the podcast will also be available on our website. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.